Hey, greetings. Thanks for joining me. It's Fred in Alaska. Um, there's a bunch of encounters coming, background stuff. Life happens and whatnot. There's some in the future that are coming, not particularly today, that are definitely viewer discretion type stuff. So those will be marked, of course. Anyway, so again, thanks for joining me. I appreciate everyone who was concerned, making sure I wasn't dead. I don't live feral, but I appreciate the concern. So anyway, what I wanted to share with you today comes from Samuel and his son. We'll call him Junior, Samuel Jr. And they're from the YK Delta, the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. We'll leave it at that. Samuel is in a certain position and whatnot, not his real name, but still, to use names of these particular rivers, it really allows people to be in a way pinpointed, so we'll just leave it alone. However, what Samuel dealt with was this encounter happened about 7 years ago, but prior to that, Samuel was able to have time with his son when he actually turned 15, because him and his son's mother didn't get along. They lived somewhere else, and so at 15 Samuel was able to take custody of his son and start, being hands-on dad versus, child support dad. So, and for 3 years, Samuel attempted to take his son out for hunting to get him laced up, trained properly, get his marksmanship up, teach him the lay of the land, teach him some of the traditional stuff that, he felt his son should know. Well, for 3 years in a row, they were thwarted, whether it be no moose to be found, whether, just running them out, or, just circumstances. So he was really stoked this particular year, about 7 years ago, to get out on the river with his son. And they live off of a major river, and this particular river they were back up in was a smaller feeder river, a lot smaller, narrower, and they were back in there about 2 miles. And from what he was saying, it's real twisty and turny. And there's this one spot it's got a pretty decent straightaway before it hooks around to the right, kind of like a fish hook shape. And this straightaway is only like maybe 125 yards, right? But that morning they were slowly coming up. It was just barely daylight, and they could see clearly. Don't mistake what I'm saying. It's just, the sun was off to their right and slowly coming up. It was just, not very high in the sky. And again, in the fall, and of course, there's lots of colors and stuff. Well, as they're going up, he was explaining that the riverbank was about 2 feet above them from the water line, roughly, maybe 3 in certain places, And the further back he got, the higher it got from the water line. And he goes, when they got back up in there, it was between 2-3 feet higher than, the water level and whatnot. And he said because of the ice, moving out in the spring, it took a lot of the brush right on the edges with it. So all the brush was a good 10 to 20 feet back away from the riverbank, right? All the alders and stuff. And so as he was coming up, his son was excited, and his son's sitting in front of him. And as they hit this straightaway, directly in front of him, they see this, what looked like a huge moose, nice rack, everything. The head was kind of twisted down, and it was holding its antlers kind of funny, but it ran through a kind of a hole in the brush directly in front of them and disappeared, right? So instantly they're excited. He kills the motor, and they just drifting forward, and he starts giving his son instruction. Hey, you're going to take the lead. We're going to go slow. Take your time. Just coaching him a little bit. And he had already altered his anchor line to have a little, wedge kind of shovel anchor, about 30 feet of rope, so he didn't have to go and run and tie it off. He could just jump up on the bank and dig it in, right? So he jumps up, he does that. His son hands him his gun. He helps his son out with his gun and stuff, and he has his son take the lead. And, he's telling him, remember what I taught you, remember where to shoot, all this stuff. And so, Junior's like, I got it. So Junior is 18 at the time, and had just turned 18 like a month before. And so he takes the lead, and Samuel's about 4 feet behind Junior, or 4 steps behind Junior roughly, to give him room. But he wanted to back him up in case, his shot missed and the bull moose tried to charge. I mean, shit happens, right? So Junior gets up to this. It's not a game trail. It was just kind of like an opening in the brush, And so when his son gets over there, he's kind of squats down a little bit and raises the gun, lowers it, raises it again, and is looking, and then lowers the gun and turns to Samuel and goes, in a regular speaking voice, goes, "It's not a moose, Dad." And Samuel's like, quiet. And he goes, "Dad, it's not a moose." And he turns again and he raises his scope and he goes, "Dad, it's not a moose." And so Samuel comes up, "What are you talking? We just saw it. We just saw this moose cut through there. What do you mean it's not a moose?" He comes around and he's looking, and his son's pointing. So where this particular opening was in the brush was basically at a point of a V shape, where it opened up, and there was kind of some scrub brush and stuff here off to immediate left behind that row of brush on the riverbank. Scrub brush and everything, but it kind of wedge shaped away from them, with the outer part being like black spruce, aspen, and whatnot, some willows. And it ran out, and the black spruce right in there, maybe 16, 18 feet from what Samuel was saying. And so Samuel's looking over his son's shoulder, and he's looking, and he goes, what do you mean? Where'd it go? Because in essence, it should have been a wide open view. Had it been a moose, it should have been clear right there. They would have heard it crashing through the trees. It wasn't adding up. So his son points and he goes, "It's right over there." And he goes, "Dad, it walked like a man." And Samuel's like, "What are you talking about? We saw a moose. What do you mean it walked like a man?" And Samuel, in his mind's eye, is trying to envision a moose walking like a man. It just wasn't adding up, right? So he looks, and way at just where the tree line curves out of view, he sees this dark things peeking out. And again, it happened to be the direction of where the sun was coming up off in the distance, and so it's silhouetted. And Samuel was like, "What?" It's kind of squatted down next to Junior and is looking, and so he raises his rifle to look through the scope, and he dials it back, and I have a little bit of a wider view, but bring it a lot closer. And he said he saw it. It was peeking out and tucking back. It was just like a head and a shoulder leaning out and then leaning back, and it threw him off, because the conundrum of it was he was expecting to see a moose, and now there's this tall man-like figure leaning out. He's like, "What the hell?" And he's asking, "What'd you see? What the hell is that?" And his son was like, "I don't know, but when I looked through the brush, Dad, it wasn't a moose. It was walking away, and it went into the brush right there, and now it's peeking out at us." And he said it walked like a man. And so Samuel's like, "Okay." And he looks through the scope one more time, he said, and just as he did and lowered it, he was just touching his son to tell him, "Hey, let's get out of here." And as he touched his son's shoulder, this thing let out a scream. And the combination of the scream simultaneously with the hand on the shoulder, Junior popped up like a jack-in-the-box, according to what Samuel said, knocked Samuel clean over, knocked the rifle out of his hand. My son takes off. So Samuel collects himself, grabs his rifle, and right behind him. And, somewhere in the midst of that, the scream stopped. So Samuel's son is down in the skiff, right now already. Kid was motivated. He's trying to fire up the kicker, but his dad pulled a little kill switch off of it, right? And it was just hanging there. All you need to do is click it into the little safety catch and it'd fire up. But, Junior was unaware. Didn't have that much experience with the outboard. So he's just yanking away, right? Almost pulling the damn thing out of the water. And Samuel's like, "Stop, stop, stop." He jumps down in the skiff, sets his rifle down, and says, "Move, move, move." And turns, his son turns and is holding his rifle. He says, calm down, we're leaving. He puts the kill switch back in place, and he fires it up. And he turns and he looks back towards the direction of that patch of, where they were looking through, the hole in the brush. And as he's looking, he can hear and feel thump, 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 like, running. And he could feel it. It was because the way the boat was still pushed up against the bank at the moment, it was transferring, and he could feel it in his feet as well. And it was like startling. It was, what the hell? And so the motor's running. He makes sure the anchor's pulled, set down in there, and the water's catching the boat and slowly pulling it as he's working his way back. And all of a sudden, as he just gets back to the kicker to, do what he has to do, put it in reverse, pull away from the bank and get turned around or whatever, As he just stands and grabs the arm of the tiller, all of a sudden a shot breaks. Boom! And it startles the shit out of him, right? Because it's immediately off to his left. His son has fired a shot into the brush. It's like, what the hell? What the hell was that? You know, he goes, it was looking at us. It was looking at us. So Junior's freaking. He racks another round in, and Samuel's like, stop shooting. You know, what the hell? And Junior's like, Dad, it was right there, Dad. It was looking at us. And he goes, what? Why'd you shoot it? You know? And Junior's like, I didn't. I shot up. And you know, so they had a little bit of back and forth because of the adrenaline and the high emotions involved. Well, Samuel had left his rifle, you know, 2 rows ahead of him on the you know, leaned against the bench seat of the Lund skiff. He jumps over and grabs it. Again, the water is pushing him back at this point, so the rear end, the stern of the skiff bumps into the bank and is starting to swing the front around. This is all going on, and as he grabs his rifle, turns back and gets back to where the kicker is, he hears a grunt, like a gurgling, reverberating kind of grunt, growl kind of noise. It was real deep, he said, and he turned, and in essence, he's looking straight off the stern at this point because the skiff was swinging around. As he looks, he was startled, and all of a sudden, he hears his son say, get down, and he turns and he sees his son standing on the bench seat, right? I mean, like, right, hands reach away. So he kind of, like, you know, instinctively ducked. Another shot, bam, they hear the scream and a bunch of thrashing. So Samuel turns around again and raises his rifle, and this thing was out of view at this point. And he said when he initially saw it standing there, he could see it better, but the face was really black. It was hard to make out features, but he could see the glint of like life in the eye. And he said the eyes looked black. And so, you know, his son shot again, you know, and he's like, whoa, shit, you know, what the hell? He's like, get down from where you're standing. I got to, you know, operate the boat. As that scream ended and they heard the thrashing and the, you know, the brief little kind of scolding he gave his son got down, and now the front end is swinging around. So where they were looking was almost behind them at this point. Back up where that river kind of hooks around, where they initially saw in the direction they saw what was a moose, they hear another scream, a very high-pitched but also a lot more powerful scream, and it startled them, right? Because the first one was loud as hell from what he said. This one was a lot louder, he said. He looks back up basically behind him now, and they're kind of stuck staring. They see this thing, and it looks real super skinny. It almost looked like it was standing sideways, kind of the way it was moving. They couldn't, at the distance, maybe at this point 150 yards, at this distance they couldn't figure out why, you know, because it was literally moving sideways, so it looked a lot skinnier. And the way it was moving, it was like it was doing something, but he said the closest thing would be a dance, but it wasn't melodic or rhythmic in any way. And then it turned broadside, and he said it was, taller than the other one. And so the other one, he said, when it was peeking from behind the trees, he realized the trees were about 18 foot-ish, between 16 and 18 foot as a rough guesstimate. This thing had to be at least 11 foot tall when it was peeking from behind the trees before the initial scream and they took off with the skiff. And he said this one was taller than the alder brush along the riverbank, which was over their heads. And so he said it had to have been at least a foot or two taller than the one they originally saw. So that scream happens and it's moving, and when it turns broadside, it kind of, he said the way it was moving was like it would slink down and kind of move and then stand up. And then when it got close to where that opening was in the brush, where they initially saw what they thought was a moose cut through, it started moving back and forth real fast and making this weird gurgly growl sound. And at this point, the skiff is already facing down river, and they're kind of drifting along this whole time. And so he jumps down and gets going. Now, this is pretty narrow, fairly deep but narrow, so he couldn't just go wide open and make the turns, because they were pretty tight turns, so he'd have to go nice and slow, to make these turns, and it was real windy. they're 2 miles as a crow flies from the mouth of where it meets up to the larger river, and river miles going back and forth is probably closer to 3. And so they're cutting back and forth, and he said there were about 4 bends heading back to where, thought like, okay, we're getting out of here, there's nothing else happening. Then they hear this crash, like a breaking sound off in the distance up ahead of them to the right. And it was just as they came around this one bend, and there was a short little run, and then it cuts back around to the left as far as the river goes. And they heard the breakup over there, and all of a sudden, they're like, they could hear it over the skiff and everything, and it was a loud cracking sound. So it was like, what the hell? So they made it around, and then when they came back around the other bend, just as they were coming around where it bends back to the left, a bend ahead of where they were, all of a sudden, just in front of them, just as they were coming into the turn, the apex of this turn where it's a little bit of a straightaway, this black spruce tree is thrown, like speared, into the muddy riverbank, to where they had to duck down immediately. If it was any lower, it would have pushed them out of the boat or stopped the boat, right? So that freaked him out, because they barely made it through that, and then he gave it a little more throttle, and then it kicked up, went a few more bends, and they heard noises kind of like thrashing behind him, and he couldn't make out if it was chasing him or if it was what it was doing, because again, he has the noise of the boat, the noise of his own thoughts in his head, and also this commotion. So it's kind of like a goulash of what the fuck, So he said there were about 2 or so, maybe 3 bends from where the black spruce wedged into the mud bank, when they came around another bend, and all of a sudden it looked like a birch tree, or a piece of a birch tree was wedged in as well, and a little lower. And he initially was like, he thought he was going to have to stop, you know what I mean? But thankfully the weight of the birch dropped into the water. So what he did was gunned it a little bit, held onto the back of the skiff so it didn't, the kicker, so it didn't kick up too far anyway, and rode over the log. He said once that happened, he got it up to what speed it could tolerate going through these S-curves. And he said it was about 3 more bends down when they hooked a right turn, and they were going to hook back around to the left. When they're in the apex of that turn, they saw it standing there again, the one that he had guessed his son shot, because when it was standing there, he could see what it looked like. It had a wet spot in the off to the side of its chest, and it didn't do anything, but his son raised a rifle, to shoot at it, and just as he fired the shot, the thing moved, and his shot missed, but it ran it off. And so they continued on, and they make it out to where the mouth of this little feeder river meets the larger river, and it's a fairly large river, so they went out to the middle, and Samuel killed the outboard so they could calm down. He lit himself a cigarette, and kind of his son was like, what the hell, what is that? And Samuel was like, well, it's a hairy man. I didn't know. I only seen him before many years ago, and it was at the distance. In other words, I knew of him, but it was like not something you see every day type of thing, so it didn't really come to mind because it was so many years ago, and of course he didn't have this kind of reference to share. And so they had a discussion. Junior was pretty shook up, and so when I had a chance to talk to Junior about what his perspective is he was excited. His dad taught him very well how to shoot, respect and all that. And the one thing his dad didn't notice is when Junior went up to that clearing, that opening in the brush, and looked, and just as he was, just before he raised his rifle, he noticed tighter to the left there was a caribou antlers on the ground with remains of a carcass, and also a dead brown bear that was paws up. And what stood out about the dead brown bear was, with these paws up, there was fur and everything still attached to the legs, but it was like the whole chest was missing from it, right? And he didn't notice the head or anything because of just how it was obscured, but there was dead critters back there. His dad didn't notice that because his dad had it a little bit, wasn't quite where he was and looking tight to the left. It was his dad's attention was the hairy man peeking, right? And then I asked him, well, what caused you when you fired the shot to actually shoot it? Not the warning shot the initial time, but the second time when you shot it. Why'd you shoot that? And he said, I didn't want it to get my dad. So, but I want to thank them for sharing that. I guess approximately 7 years ago, on a major riverway in the YK Delta, the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. I want to thank you, Samuel, for reaching out and sharing. I know it's not easy, especially with some of the cultural things. There's places where you can't even go and speak about the hairy man, and they'll want you the fuck out of the village. They ain't gonna play none of that because you'll bring a bad omen according to what they believe, and bad fishing. They'll steal something, or there's a multitude of things. So, and I don't knock that belief, that superstitious belief, because it started somewhere for a certain reason. So I don't knock it. I have a different view, of course, because of public safety, but again, I wouldn't never begrudge somebody for their beliefs. But thanks again, Samuel, for sharing that. Thank you, Junior, if you watch this, for being willing to share your portion of it. And I'm behind on encounters. There's just background stuff happening and whatnot, so more coming. I'll post another one here in just a couple days, and it'll be back onto a regular schedule. So thank you guys for joining me, and we'll catch you on the next one.